All right, ladies and gentlemen, real quick, just to give you an idea of what we're here for, you can see up on the screen, we have a cold case update for you. A few months ago, in August of this year, we met with all the media outlets and we kind of talked to you about a reorganization that was going on within the department with our crime scene, our cold cases, the way that they were being investigated. At that time, you had an opportunity to meet with our cold case detective, Detective John Laughlin. At that time, we also told you guys that based on this reorganization that we expected the new rearranging, the reorganization to bear some fruit, and that is exactly what has happened, and that's why we're here today. So at this time, I would like to turn it over to Captain Carl Lilly.
Thank you for coming today. We're real excited about this. We're using advanced technology that's come into play recently. DNA results and things throughout the years have improved. And so we've decided to dedicate an officer full-time to cold cases we've already mentioned. We have one success that we'd like to talk about now. Administration is 100% behind our officers who do this. Right now it's currently Officer John Laughlin, doing great things for us. He's got several on the burner right now, and he's got one that he wants to talk to you about today that he solved out. Without any further ado, Officer John Laughlin.
All right, thanks, Captain. Today I'd like to talk to you about a case from 1980. As a matter of fact, 39 years ago this month, Richard Michael Willoughby was a victim of murder here in Wichita Falls. How that case began was he and his brother Patrick came to Wichita Falls. They're from Hamlin, Texas, and they traveled here to see their mother who was sick in the hospital. At that time it was called Bethania Hospital. It's United Regional now on 11th Street. And they had gone to the hospital to visit their mom. And when they left the hospital, they checked in at the Trade Winds Hotel across the road on Broad Street, between Holiday and Broad. And they got separate rooms with the plan of staying through the weekend and coming back and seeing their mom the next day. That night, Mike told his brother that he didn't want to go right up as early as Pat was going, so he would go later on. So Pat got up, went to see his mom on his own. Later that afternoon, he tried calling for Mike and couldn't find him. By that evening, he still hadn't heard back from Mike, so he got a little concerned, so he made a missing persons report. He made that report on November the 8th of 1980. On November the 9th of 1980, the body of a white male was found in high weeds on the dam at Lake Wichita near the state hospital off Kemp Boulevard. Near that body was a pair of eyeglasses. That time, Officer Glenn Barham responded to the scene and collected photographs, and he recognized the decedent's clothing as matching that of the missing person report that was taken the day before. The white shirt, khaki pants, patchwork cowboy boots, and eyeglasses. So he notified the Crimes Against Persons detective sergeant, and they contacted Pat. Pat was able to go with the detectives to the morgue and positively identify his brother. So his brother was then sent off for autopsy. This is an aerial photograph of the crime scene outlined there in the red triangle. In that vicinity is where the body of Mike Willoughby was found. You can see also landmarked to the south and east of that is the state hospital where it still sits today. The autopsy was performed at the Dallas County Medical Examiner's Office a few days later by Dr. Arthur Copeland. And Dr. Copeland discovered multiple lacerations, abrasions, and an underlying skull fracture. Mike was also positively identified through fingerprints, and the cause and manner of death was blunt force trauma homicide. During the autopsy, Dr. Copeland noted this stamp-like image on Mike's left hand. And he told the investigators about that. This will become an important piece of the case later on. Can y'all see that okay? It looks like an Indian holding a spear. So the original investigator that was called out when the body was found was Detective Jim Berneathy. He was assigned the initial follow-up investigation, and he did a very thorough, comprehensive investigation. As a matter of fact, everything that I'm telling you today wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the hard work and dedication of the officers that came before me. Detective Berneathy did an outstanding job. Detective Tony Fox is another cold case investigator that worked on this case. Ken Coughlin was the sergeant over the Crimes Against Persons unit at this one time, at one time, and dedicated some work and effort into the case. So I'm just kind of bringing up the tail end and putting the rest of the pieces together. What Detective Bernithi was able to do was he was able to establish a timeline for Mike. When he came to Wichita Falls, the fact that he had gone to a bank in Monday, Texas, and took out a small loan so he'd have some money to pay for his hotel and while he was in town, which became important later on in the case because it shows us that the victim had a couple $100s on his person whenever he was last seen. However, when his body was recovered, he was missing his wallet and some jewelry. He didn't have those items with him. So it looks like on that Friday night that they arrived and left, after they left the hospital, checked into the hotel, Mike went to the Windjammer, which was a bar there at the Tradewinds Hotel. He opened a tab, had a few drinks, and that was the last anybody had seen of him. But for the stamp on the victim's hand that the doctor found, Detective Bernithi was able to canvass the bars around the downtown area. At that time, you paid a cover charge to get into the nightclub or a bar, and they would stamp your hand so that they knew that you paid in case you left and came back. He was able to identify this hand stamp to a specific bar located in a downtown area. He also found a friend of Mike's, Sally Sanchez, who lived in Mundy, Texas. And during the interview of Sally, she said that Mike had a ring he always wore with him. It was the gold tiger's eye ring. And it wasn't very expensive, but it was something he liked a lot. She had bought it for him out of a catalog. Detective Bernithi had the forethought of collecting the picture of that. She allowed him to cut the picture of the ring out of the catalog. Here you see it taped to the original typed report that Detective Bernithi had submitted. She also identified the bar that Bernithi had found the hand stamp to as a place that she had frequented with the victim many times whenever they came to Wichita Falls. Here you can see, or you can try to see, the areas of interest that I've explained so far. Outlined in the blue box is the hospital where he was visiting his mother. In the yellow box is the Tradewinds Hotel, which is where him and his brother Pat were staying in separate rooms. And then up here to the north and a little bit east, you'll see a green arrow, and that's the bar or the pub where the hand stamp came back to match. This is the very Friday night that Mike was last seen alive. So Bernithi followed down many leads. He had several leads that came in from Crime Stoppers tips and concerned citizens. The bars they passed the picture of the victim around at. People had all kinds of pieces of information, and he checked them all out, but none of them actually identified a solid investigative lead that would identify a perpetrator or an offender. So the case was inactivated until 1993. In 1993, Detective Sergeant Ken Coughlin over the Crimes Against Persons Unit received a phone call followed by a fax from the Leonard Correctional Facility in Leonard, Kansas. They said they had an inmate there by the name of Daniel Adolph Edwards, who had admitted that he had killed a man in Wichita Falls in 1980. He told them enough information that they knew to contact our agency, and a crude sketch of where this crime occurred was then faxed to us. He said he killed the person next to a lake that was near a state hospital. A records check of Daniel Adolph Edwards revealed that he was a resident of Wichita Falls during the time frame that the offense occurred. In fact, he had arrest records that bracketed the November homicide. In September of 1980 and again in December of 1980, Edwards was arrested by our police department. He attempted to follow up in 1993. Edwards asked for an attorney, refused to make any further statements or comments, and based on the lack of physical evidence to support an arrest or prosecution, the case was inactivated and went cold again. Detective Tony Fox, cold case investigator at the time after 1993 and before I took over the case, tried to put the pieces of this puzzle back together by identifying the person who actually talked to Mr. Edwards in the prison in Kansas. And he was able to find and identify that employee who corroborated the statements that were given to Detective Sergeant Coughlin in 1993. However, still an absence of physical evidence did not allow the case to go forward any further. What he did gather was the employee remembered Edwards admitting that he went to a body of water, a lake, near a state hospital, and that he had hit the victim with a big stick. And that's how he had killed the victim. When I was assigned the follow-up investigation, a complete thorough reorganization of all the case files and any physical evidence that existed was conducted. At that time, I found a missing report because there was an article of evidence that was referred to in one report but not listed on that report. So an archive search through the Dallas County Medical Examiner's Office revealed that the item of interest was in fact a human hair found in the victim's hand at the time of autopsy that had been analyzed and was discovered to be not consistent with the victim's. I know, based on the advancement in technology that the captain had mentioned earlier, that a human hair, if it contains a root, can render nuclear DNA. Even without a root, we can get mitochondrial DNA. That DNA is like a genetic fingerprint, and it'll identify a person to the exclusion of all others. Knowing that, and knowing that I had a potential suspect who'd already been identified, Mr. Edwards, I sought an evidentiary search warrant. With the assistance of the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, I had tracked Mr. Edwards, had been discharged from prison several years after his admission, and he was living in the areas between southern Tennessee and northern Georgia. So I traveled to that area. I traveled to North Georgia, and I found Mr. Edwards. And executing an evidentiary search warrant on his person, I conducted a non-custodial interview of him before that, and during that interview he confessed that he had met the victim at a bar in downtown Wichita Falls, that he had taken him to a lake, which would be Lake Wichita, and that he had beat the victim over the back of the head with a club that he brought with him, which was a wooden stick filled with lead. After he beat the victim unconscious, he took the victim's ring and wallet. He described the ring, and I recognized the description as that matching what Sally Sanchez had told Detective Bernithi 38 years before, showed him a picture of the ring from the report, and he identified it as the ring that he had taken from the victim. With that, I've returned to Texas, submitted a DNA sample from Mr. Edwards to the lab for analysis. We're awaiting results, but based on his confession, corroborating the facts of the case that we already had established, warrants for his arrest were issued, and he will be arrested, extradited back to Texas. Case packet has been delivered to the district attorney's office. Do you have any questions?
Do you know the circumstances while he was in prison, how that came about that he confessed this?
What he told me in his confession was that he thought before he died, he wanted to see his grandma again in heaven, that he had to bare his soul and admit what he had done. And that's why he made the admission to the prison officials.
What was he in prison for at the time?
I believe it was aggravated assault on a public servant in Kansas. A records check revealed he did have an extensive violent criminal history. Yes, ma'am.
So he originally is from Wichita Falls, Edwards is?
No, he's originally from that area of North Georgia, Dade County. And he was living in Wichita Falls at the time of this offense. And then from there to Kansas, where he was incarcerated, and from his discharge in Kansas back to Georgia.
Did he give any of the motive behind choosing Willoughby, or does it seem to be related to the fact that he had the money and the jewelry on him?
He gave a motive that at this time I'm not able to discuss pending litigation, the prosecution of the case. But he did tell me why he had assaulted him and took his property.
And maybe you've gone over this already. Once he's in Wichita Falls, what charges is he facing?
The offense of committing a murder during the commission of a robbery is a capital offense, capital murder. I issued my warrant for capital murder. The district attorney's office, I believe, when reviewed and presented to the grand jury, indicted him on account of murder. Based on his age, Mr. Edwards was 30 years old 39 years ago. So he's 68, 69 years old right now. And I think they believe that there would be an easier disposition of the case with the lower charge. It's still a first-degree felony. Yes, ma'am.
So the hair with Edwards' DNA, that was originally tagged back in '93, or it was some of that was noted but never tested?
In 1980, it was collected from his hand. In 1993, DNA would have been brand new, and it would have been mainly from fluid samples, like semen or blood, saliva. It wasn't from the root of a hair or from the shaft of a hair. That type of DNA technology wasn't developed in 1993, not fully, at least not enough for our agency to recognize and to submit that for analysis. So we have done that when I picked up the case, but we don't have the results of that yet.
When was family notified?
I notified the family after I issued the warrant for Edward's arrest. Patrick died of natural causes many years ago, but I was able to track down some nephews and some cousins that live in Florida, or they live out of state.
Can I get the spelling of the victim's name?
Yes. The full name is Richard Michael Willoughby, W-I-L-L-O-U-G-B-Y. Let me make sure.
L-L-O-U-G.
W-I-L-L-O-U-G-H-B-Y.
You don't have a current mug of our suspect here?
A current mugshot, no. That would be something that the sheriff's department will get whenever they.
Bring him back here. Is
He has the right to fight extradition, in which case it would require a governor's warrant. And so they're in the process of trying to work those things out logistically.
Where is he incarcerated right now?
He is not incarcerated at the time. He is in a nursing home. He has some health issues. So he's in a nursing home. He's there until they can figure out whether and when they're going to extradite him.
You guys good?
All right, I hope that was helpful.
Do you think there's a way to bring that in, so I can
Yeah.